The indictments allege, and the other activities in our report describe, efforts to interfere in our political system. They needed to be investigated and understood that there were multiple, systematic efforts to interfere in our election. And that allegation deserves the attention of every American.
That was Robert Mueller's warning to every American. That included the president, too, about the threat that the Russian attack posed to our country. And when he testifies in just a few weeks to 2 House committees, Mueller is sure to be asked about the findings of his investigation into whether Trump himself may have been compromised. Joining our conversation, the man who first launched the FBI's full field investigation into the president, former acting director and deputy director of the FBI, our friend Andrew McCabe. Matt, Frank, Donna, and Chuck are all still with us. Andy, I want to ask you your reaction, not just to the fact that Mueller will appear on Capitol Hill, but the impact. I mean, you were targeted by this president, attacked by this president. You kept your powder dry, but when you wrote a book, it had a big impact. It changed the conversation around your suspicions and your reasons for opening that full field investigation into the president. Robert Mueller was investigating this president, was on the scene longer than you got to stay, unfortunately, for our country. What do you think the impact will be of hearing his voice on this report?
Well, Nicole, I think it'll be extraordinary. I think you only have to look back as far as the very limited 9-minute statement that Director Mueller gave just a few weeks ago. Completely changed the conversation around the report, around the investigative findings, and the impact that that report has had on people in Congress and I think on the general public. So if you extrapolate out from that very brief statement to think about Director Mueller sitting behind the witness stand, answering questions from both sides. I do agree with your panelists that he'll likely stay within the 4 corners of his report, but there is incredible ground to cover there, and I think there are revelations that many, many people have not heard before, have not read in the report, so I think you can't underestimate the significance of the director's upcoming testimony.
I want to ask you about time that Robert Mueller may spend on Capitol Hill behind closed doors in a closed session, because it would appear that it's possible that some of the most sensitive parts of his probe may be discussed there. Is that a safe assumption?
Absolutely. I think that's an accurate assumption. I think the fact that his senior staffers will participate in what sounds like those debriefings that'll take place certainly behind closed doors in classified settings, I think is another indication that those sessions will go much deeper into the details that the investigators uncovered during the course of their work.
So let me put you on the spot. If you're Robert Mueller or one of his investigators that picked up the ball that you handed them from the investigation you opened into whether or not the firing of Comey wasn't just an attempt to obstruct the investigation, but whether that was part of coordinating or conducting himself in a way that Russia would have wanted him to do. Do you think that the special counsel's office will brief out the way that concluded, what they found? And should they, if people like Devin Nunes are in the room?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nicole, and it raises a whole host of very sensitive issues. It's critically important always to return to the team's most significant conclusion, which is, of course, they firmly established beyond a shadow of a doubt the impact and the effect, or I'm sorry, the fact that the Russians did, in fact, meddle in our campaign. They then narrowed the scope of their inquiry to whether or not they could prove a criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian actors, and of course concluded that they did not have evidence to prove such a conspiracy. That is a far cry from resolving counterintelligence concerns that may arise from any number of facts they uncovered during the course of their work. So we've often referred to the fact that the report cites over 100, I think it's more in the neighborhood of 140 different interactions between people associated with the campaign and the president and Russians or individuals associated with Russian intelligence. That's a feast for counterintelligence investigators to feed upon, to investigate, to peel back the cover on for years and years to come. Our counterintelligence professionals are frequently confronted by this dilemma of how and what of their work to share with Congress. They are obligated to share some of their work with Congress. They are obligated to keep the intelligence communities updated as to significant developments and significant intelligence problems or failures as they're defined in the statute. But there is a great sensitivity involved there in ongoing work as well. So I would expect that that would be an issue that the kind of remnants of the special counsel's team will coordinate very closely with the FBI folks who may be continuing that work.
So two former senior Republican policymakers said to me that the way to do the equivalent of sort of waking the Republican body politic up might be through what you're describing, the national security implications of the Russian attack, and to present to men who, at least on some level, have a conscience, have a reputation that they value in national security circles, people like Senator Burr, that if Robert Mueller is able to lay out the kinds of things that had you concerned before you left, the conduct that was so inexplicably precisely what Putin would have orchestrated if he were pulling Donald Trump strings as though he were a puppet, that really could sort of be the equivalent of shaking up this conversation in a way that the criminal probe couldn't be, because Republicans felt like they had to circle the wagons around the Republican figurehead, at least leader of their party. Do you agree with that analysis?
I do, and I think that it gets to really the heart of your first question, and that is, what is the significance of having these hearings and having these briefings? You know, for me, the answer to that question is exactly what you just referred to. It's not just about political theater or one side pursuing a goal or an agenda with respect to the president's, prospects for impeachment and that sort of thing. The most important function that we are trying to serve here is that Congress has a responsibility to conduct oversight, and that information should be heard by the Congress and to the greatest extent possible by the American public, so that people can consider these things as they make their own decisions, as they proceed through their own, political, the decisions they make according to their own political preferences. People have a right to know what the team uncovered, in the same way that Congress has a right and a responsibility to understand the counterintelligence concerns that the special counsel effort may have uncovered and how those concerns are being addressed now.
Andy, stay in this conversation, but I want to bring you in, Frank. This to me feels like the defroster, that this debate is so locked and so broken, so paralyzed right and left. But if you can make this case, if Robert Mueller behind closed doors can articulate what Andy's talking about, that Russia attacked us, wake up. We have to make sure, we have an obligation to make sure that Christopher Wray and I remember Admiral Rogers, when he was still at the NSA, testifying with his whole body slumped over his desk when Elizabeth Warren was asking him in testimony, do you have what you need to protect us from Russia? And he was like, God, no. I mean, if there's a way to wake them up with the counterintelligence investigation, the findings of the Russian threat, and Donald Trump's ambivalence about protecting this country, it could be significant in terms of sort of not repairing, but waking people up to the threat that Russia presents and getting people back to being on the side of our country. I don't think that anyone will ever really understand. I don't think it's understandable how Donald Trump got away with having 150 contacts with Russians, and it feels like there were no consequences. But there is still a national security conversation to be had around the Mueller probe.
The unanswered counterintelligence questions will be the elephant in the room in the closed door sessions. There's no question about that. And even though the Mueller team might have to defer to the counterintelligence division at FBI headquarters, because it appears they still have that case, just asking them the questions, what did you find? What were the intelligence nuggets that came out as you were exploring the motivation for this president to align himself with Russia? Why do you think he did it? What's the data showing the compromise that might exist or the vulnerabilities that might exist? How many times was the campaign team briefed on a threat from Russia, and did you receive any word from them that they were concerned? All of that, plus the indictment of over 24 Russians for interfering with our election, could actually cause the GOP and the Dems in that committee to coalesce around a common issue, the threat to our security.
I know now people can accuse us of having something other than water in our cups. Chuck Rosenberg, I want to ask you a question, too, on this front. Could Robert Mueller be asked to explain if the fact that Paul Manafort blew up his cooperation agreement, if that got in the way of Robert Mueller getting to the bottom of whether or not there was a conspiracy between the Russians or Russian agents in the Trump orbit?
Sure. I mean, in fact, in the report itself, Nicole, the Mueller team talks about the fact that there are things they couldn't get. There's information from overseas that they couldn't get. Some people chose not to cooperate or lied to them. And so, the fact that Manafort or others withheld information or lied to the FBI certainly undermined the team's own confidence in its report. I don't mean in the sense that they didn't find Russian interference. They certainly did. I don't mean in the sense that the president didn't obstruct the investigation. He certainly did. But that there are other pieces of information that the team would have uncovered if people like Manafort and others had been truthful.
Andy McCabe, I want to give you the last question in this block, and I want to pick this up every time we get to talk to you. But do you feel like Mueller going to Capitol Hill? To me, it feels like for a man who spent his life as a public servant, who did more for this country than just about anyone I can think of still on the stage. Is this asking too much from him? He said in his press conference, "This is the last time you'll hear from me." Adam Schiff has described him as a not uncooperative, but an unwilling witness. What do you think is going through his mind right now?
Well, I think I have a pretty good idea what's going through his mind, having seen him approach these sort of opportunities in the past. Nicole, what I would remind myself at this point is that there are many things in the course of Robert Mueller's life that he did not want to do, but he did because he felt his country needed him to do it. And I think this will be an experience that he adds to that list. He is a reluctant witness. He's kind of a frosty guy to begin with, and I don't mind if he hears that. But look, nobody looks forward to testifying. I've had to do it myself many times. It is incredibly arduous. You go through intense preparation for days and days, maybe weeks before you have to appear, which I'm sure he will do. Your focus is entirely on keeping your testimony within the guardrails that the lawyers and the agency has provided for you, and to being perfectly accurate. You want to be as open and as complete and accurate in your answers as possible. And you would, of course, prefer not to get caught up in the political gamesmanship. And so you have to do that in an environment where both sides are really pushing you in one direction or another, trying to kind of elicit the next soundbite that supports their perspective. So it's an incredibly tough situation to walk into. It's not one that the director enjoys, and so I'm sure he's looking forward to it about like getting a root canal. But nevertheless, he is Robert Mueller. He is an American hero. There is really never too much to ask from an American hero. That's why we think of them as heroes, and I'm confident that he will rise to the occasion this time.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.